Okay, we are back on camera. Sorry for the disruption about that, but we're going forward now. Okay, Ms. Taylor?
Thank you. Your Honor, may I attempt to share my screen?
Yes.
All right, Dr. Edelman, let's talk about community attitude survey. What is that?
Well, it's a survey designed to estimate opinions and experiences in greater populations, which in this case are the prospective jurors in Latah County.
Is there a specific way you set up to do a survey? Can
Yes, of course.
you tell us about it?
Sure. So a lot of the design and structure of these surveys is based on some of the guidelines, professional guidelines from APOR, which is the American Association of Public Opinion Research, and the ASTC, which is the American Society of Trial Consultants, and also 40 years of people doing this. So the way it works is we randomly select people through a random digit dialing approach. So it's a probability sample. Everybody has a known chance of being included. And the first section is a screener to assess to make sure people are jury eligible. So they have to live in the county, have a driver's license, or be registered to vote, be 18 and over, and so on. And then they're introduced to the survey. There's an introduction actually at the beginning, even before they answer a question, or they're told why they're being called. We're calling to get their opinions about an upcoming trial, and that their opinions are important because they were selected as a representative, household or whatever in the community. And then after they go through that screening process, they're instructed that there's no right or wrong answers to any of the questions. They can always report that they have no opinion or they don't know, and everything will remain anonymous. So the first few questions try to measures just basic criminal justice attitudes to get them familiar with the process, familiar with the survey, answering questions. And then they're introduced to the actual case. So they're read a case recognition question. And then if they know about the case, they continue and are asked prejudgment questions, open-ended questions to assess some key opinions, then case knowledge questions, which are recognition questions. And then they go into the demographic section, which is how they consume media. And yeah.
You mentioned two organizations, and I think earlier you mentioned that you were regularly a member of those organizations. Do they help set standards for how surveys should take place?
They do.
And tell me a little bit more about the introduction. Why do you do that?
The first introduction or the instruction after that, they get through the screener?
The introduction and then the instruction.
Yeah, well, you're trying to encourage people to participate to increase response rates, right? So you're told, again, why you're calling. It's not a sales call. We're calling to get the opinions of people in your community and why. So it's not just random. So they understand it's about an upcoming trial. We don't tell them what trial because that would clearly lead to potential response bias. And they're encouraged to continue participating because they represent their community. They were selected randomly. And then there's efforts to increase response rates by we do callbacks. So everybody, each number is called up to 3 times at different times of the day. So if somebody maybe is at work, you still have a chance of being included in the survey. There's soft conversion techniques. So if somebody's kind of on the fence, like maybe they're like, maybe I'm busy, can you call me back? We try to find out when can we call you back so we can talk to them later, just to encourage them to participate and not drop off. So all of that stuff is done to increase response rates as best we can. And that's all starts with the introduction. And then the follow-up introduction or instruction kind of is similar. It explains there's no right or wrong answers. They're not forced to say yes or no. They can say no opinion, I don't know. They can refuse to answer the question, all of those things.
Can they answer some questions and not others if that's what they want to do?
Absolutely. That's called a refusal. So they might say, I don't feel comfortable answering that question, or I'm not going to answer that.
All right, so you did a community attitude survey in this case. Did you only look at Latah County?
No.
What counties did you look at?
So we looked at 4 different counties overall. So we looked at Ada County, Bannock County, Canyon County, and Latah County.
I'm going to talk to you a little bit later about the 3 comparative counties. But for now, can you walk us through your high-level findings for Latah County and Ada County?
Sure. So I think high level, you can see case recognition is very high. And it's also high in Ada County. It's 93% there. It's almost everyone in Latah County, 98%, which is similar to what I saw in the George Floyd case, where it was 99%. So this is extremely high. They're pretty much the same. And it's not just a passive familiarity with the case. It's not that they recognize it but don't know much. You can see people in Latah County reported that they followed the case somewhat or very closely. Almost 70% are closely following this case. And again, that means they're actively looking for information, passively consuming information, talking about it. So it's a big deal in this community. And there's a presumption of guilt. The burden has shifted. So 67% believe Bryan Kohberger is guilty of murder, and 25% reported that he's definitely guilty. So these are strong opinions. And 51% reported what I call a fixed opinion, where they reported that Kohberger would have a difficult time convincing them that he's not guilty. So the burden of proof is shifted on the defendant to prove his innocence. And that's undermines due process. That's not how our system is designed to work. And also on the question of sentence, you can see that 52% believe that he should be sentenced to death.
When I look at this slide and I look at the prejudgment, guilty of murder, and am I using that term right? Prejudgment means somebody's decided before we ever get anywhere near trial that Mr. Kohberger is guilty of murder. When I look at those numbers, it's higher in Ada County. And it's not a secret to anybody in this room that our argument is to move this case to Ada County. Does this seem counterintuitive when I look at the prejudgment rate and it's higher percentage-wise in Ada County?
Yeah, so first of all, in my mind, it's 2 questions. One is, should the case be moved? Not where, it's should the case be moved? Has the presumption of innocence been undermined based on the reasonable likelihood standard, which is less than the preponderance of the evidence? So second question is where? In a case like this, you're going to see high case recognition and high prejudgment everywhere. They're essentially the same in terms of 67%, 68%. But when you look at case recognition and size, population size, you'll find that in Ada County, there's about 16 times more people in that county that have not prejudged, if you do the math. So yes, those numbers look the same for those who recognize the case, but there's a much larger swath of people who haven't prejudged. And it's not just prejudgment that matters. So that's one variable you look at, but it's not just that. There's a host of other things. Extent of case knowledge, connections to the case, been exposed to rumors. There's all these other factors that play in. It's not just one item, it's the totality of the findings, not just one question.
When I move to the other slide, what am I seeing on this slide?
So these are instances just to show how invested people in this community are. So almost 80%, 79% have talked about this case online or in person. And that's where information is spread. So even those who may not closely follow the news are learning about it from their neighbors, from their coworkers, from family, from social media, and all of that. So information is being spread through those channels as well. And you do see big differences there when you're looking at Ada County. It's much lower because they're less invested in this case. It wasn't a shocking incident that occurred in their own community. You see that 32% have watched a show, for example, that Netflix or Paramount show or Dateline or something about the case. Almost 40%, 39% personally experienced high levels of stress, anxiety, or fear during the search for the killer while they were here. So that's very high. And then 45% know someone else who has. And if you look at those together, it's actually about 63% have either personally experienced fear or know someone who has during that search. And that shows like the impact they've had on them. And you'll see it later in some of the opens where people talk about, I was scared to walk outside. They're running to their car from work because they don't feel safe. They can see the house from their office. One person mentions that their wife was scared to go to the supermarket. People talk about they locked their doors for the first time. So it just shows the personal fear and impact this case created in this community that you do not see in large communities.
I have a follow-up question for you on this slide. The statistics that you show us show that the incident of looking at things on social media and Netflix and regular primetime news shows is higher in Latah County. And that correlates to the sampling of things you showed us a few moments ago, just your sample of what's out there on social media, on Netflix, and that sort of thing. Is that right? It's higher in Latah County?
It is higher in Latah County. Now, when you say correlates, like I didn't do a statistical analysis, I would say that's the stuff, the content out there. That's what it looks like if you just do a search, you're following it. And on the anxiety question, that number for Ada County is about 32%. So it's much lower.
Looking at this slide, what does it mean with these differences we're seeing in numbers?
Well, to me, again, it shows personal connection, the personal experience. In a big county, there might be a sensational crime, but you don't see people feeling that way. Because crime is unfortunately frequent, and there might be something else that captures their attention, or there's so much going on. It's not shocking. Here, this is something where people talk about again. There's an idyllic community where everyone felt safe, and this person took it away from us. It was like shattering this sense of security and safety that we had, and everybody experienced it. And my guess is a lot of people can probably reflect on where they were when they learned this and how it impacted them personally. So it's very unique.
What are we looking at on this slide?
I think you skipped a slide. Yeah.
Okay.
Is this one that starts with lived or know someone who lived?
Yes.
Okay. So again, this comes back to personal connections. So 78% of survey respondents either lived or know someone who lived in Moscow when the murders occurred, compared to 20% in Ada County. And that's not surprising because if you look at the size of Latah County, it's about 32,500 people over the age of 18, compared to about 406,000 in Ada County. And I think it's like 66% of Latah County is in Moscow. So it's a huge percentage. So it's not shocking that people were here or know somebody who was here when it occurred. And a large number of people are students or employees at the university. It's a quarter of the sample. I ran across one citation where it was like 36%, so it's even higher, much lower in Ada County. And you can see 40% of people have visited the home or walked by it where this crime occurred. And again, if you look at some of the opens, somebody talks about seeing the house from their office window. So it's a constant reminder of this awful thing that happened. These are things, again, that jurors going into that courtroom will see. It's like indicators in the community of what impacted them. People may be fearful of people know they're on the jury and all those things because it's such a small community and people are so invested. And you can see that 22% of the respondents actually work or know someone who worked for a law enforcement agency involved in the investigation. 22% compared to just 4% in Ada County. So again, direct connections to this case.
And those direct connections, those are things that a Latah County juror would bring in. Is that right?
Yes, and that's where we see these big differences in national cases like this. This is typically what you see when the entire state is saturated with coverage. Everybody's going to know about it and have opinions to some degree, but it doesn't necessarily have personal connection. That's why cases like the Oklahoma City bombing case was moved. I mean, that was a national case. Everybody knew about it, but they still moved it because of the personal connections.
Now advance to the slide. What are we seeing on this slide?
Well, this goes back to case knowledge. So we talked earlier in the day about how case knowledge and impacts prejudgment and how we have this belief perseverance. So people develop these more complex schema and case knowledge. They're more resistant to change. And you can see almost 80% of people in Latah County were familiar with at least 5 of the 9 media items we tested in the survey. Almost 80%. And 52% knew 7 out of the 9, or at least 7 of those items. So they have a lot of case knowledge here. It's quite high.
While we're here, talking about the media items, did you test on every media item you could find?
No.
Did you have to select a certain number so that you could do the survey?
What I do is I read all of the media coverage that is local, those local newspapers, and I'm pulling items that stand out, that are repeated quite a bit. So there's like multiple references to certain things and things that are inadmissible, prejudicial, things that are likely to create bias and have an impact.
All right. I want to talk a little bit more about how you set up the survey. What are we seeing?
So this should kind of give you an indication of the flow of the survey. So this is what I call the case recognition question. And it's developed by reading a lot of the coverage and seeing how the case is commonly described in the language in the newspaper and TV to construct a case recognition item to try to trigger a memory. So if someone answers yes to this question, question 2A, they then go to the prejudgment question. If somebody answers no, we give them a little more information to see if that triggers a memory. If that does trigger a memory, then they go to the prejudgment question. And if not, they go to the demographic question. So we always have 2 case recognition questions. That's the recommendation, again, in the ASTC professional guidelines. We usually pick up 1 to 2% when we do that in most surveys.
Does this question come after your earlier questions to get them to take your survey, the introduction and information questions?
Yes, it's actually even deeper. So you get the introduction. First, you get why we're calling, and then you go through screener questions, and then you're given an instruction about you. There's no right or wrong answers. You can always say, I don't know. I can always refuse. Your answers are anonymous. Then they answer, I think, 3 or 4 general criminal justice questions, and then they get to this question.
When you say the prejudgment question, are you talking about the media items stuff? Is that the same thing you're talking about?
Prejudgment is whether or not you believe a defendant's guilty of whatever the crime is. This is before any of the media items. You would never put those media items and then ask if you think they're guilty, because then you'll create response effects. Like maybe they didn't know that item and you just gave them prejudicial information, and now I think he's guilty because you just told me he confessed, or whatever thing it is. Like, you wouldn't want to do that.
Is that why the survey is designed that way?
Yes.
All right, let's talk about some of the survey results. Walk us through what we're seeing here.
Okay, so again, the data suggests that this case has captured the community's attention. This is not a case where people have moved on. Almost everyone in the community recognizes this case. You're at 98% recognition rate. And it's not just a passing familiarity. People are closely following the case. 29% are following it very closely. 39% are following it somewhat closely. So you're basically at 60% closely following this case, which is quite high.
All right, what are we seeing on this slide?
So this is one of the ways we test the validity of our survey. So we talked again, when we talk about the research, we know that people who closely follow a case, people who have a lot of case knowledge, are more likely to believe a defendant is guilty. So one of the things we would expect is to find a similar relationship in our survey, which indicates validity. So, and that's what we find. So whether or not people are closely following this case is significantly related to bias. So if people are following it very closely, within that group, the guilt rate is 84%, and somewhat closely it's 73%. Just kind of looking at it combined, you're at basically 77% of people who are following it somewhat or very closely believe the defendant's guilty of murder. So the more you follow it, the more likely you're to be exposed to prejudicial content, the more likely you are to develop a complex memory and case knowledge, and more likely to have an opinion.
All right, what did you learn about prospective jurors who are talking to each other?
So one is the fact they are talking to each other, and we don't always see that. Sometimes that's 40%, 50%, or even less in terms of talking about a specific case. And you can see here, it's almost everyone. 88% of people who know about the case have talked about it either in person or online. That's quite high. And they're following it, seeing things on social media. They're watching, Netflix episodes or Paramount or whatever it was on. They're seeing shows. They're seeing it in their news feeds. They're closely talking about it. In a small community, that's how information gets spread. It's what we call this informal communication network.
Did you have an opportunity in your survey to learn more about different rumors and things that are going around in Latah County?
I did. So we asked an open-ended question after the prejudgment question, and then it should be what they know about the case and their opinion. And we asked what rumors or theories they've heard in the community to see if they're regurgitating some of the stuff that's been in the newspaper, on social media, the idea, again, of informal communication networks. In smaller communities, you tend to get a lot of like, well, I knew somebody who knew this person, or personal connections, and information gets spread that way. And that's what we saw here. There's a lot of references to things that, the defendant committed a murder in Oregon, like speculation, no evidence of that. It's just something they heard, that he talked about committing the perfect murder on a paper, or that he hates women and he had trouble at the university he goes to with women, and people who worked with him had problems. He stalked her because she didn't respond to him. People were looking at Reddit comments or Reddit posts he had made and from years back, all that kind of stuff. And then references to him, having obsession with some of the victims, ritual animal killings. And these are just a couple examples. Like, you'll see that stuff everywhere, but the amount you see in Latah County is much higher. Like, if you go through comments in Ada County, you'll find some too. You can find examples, and I'm sure if you go to Bannock and Canyon, you're going to see them because the case has gotten so much attention, but not to the degree you have here. And given the size of the community, it's much more significant.
Did you record and document all of these comments in the actual survey report?
Yes.
Okay. And that's something that we provided to the court, and the state has no objection, so the court can read the full scope of the rumors from Latah County residents on his own time, I guess.
Yes.
Thank you.
Some fun light reading.
All right. What did you learn about Latah County residents that were related to Moscow, specific Moscow connections?
Well, this is kind of the unique nature of this too, that I see in cases like natural disasters, like wildfires is a good example, where it's this like collective trauma everybody goes through. So you can see 76% of residents here lived or knew someone who lived in Moscow at the time of the murders. So they either are here, the loved one is here, and it creates anxiety, right? So I think it was like almost 40% of students left during Thanksgiving, didn't come back because they were scared for their safety. And you see that in the other questions. So asking about if people experience stress, anxiety, or fear during that search, and you can see 39% reported that they personally did, and another 45% reported that someone they know